Get ready to go back to the future of the past, back in the past, but now showcased in the present day. We are looking at the first second edition box set from Mystara, Karameikos, Kingdom of Adventure. This box set is still pretty to this day. The production quality was top-notch. However, it hasn't aged well as far as contents go, and particularly the CD you were meant to play during adventures and the contents of the book clearly show how much Wrath of the Immortals changed the setting, and not for the better. So this week, turn on your CD player if you still have one, and let's explore Karameikos, Kingdom of Adventure. I'm Mr. Welch, and welcome to Mystara. This was published in 1994, written by Aaron Alstead, the father of Karameikos, Jeff Grubb, and Thomas Reed. Paul Jacques, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, did the cover art for the box set, and the interior art was done by about half a dozen different artists. The content of the box set was beefy. In addition to the audio CD mentioned above, you got a 128-page book, a 32-page adventure book, a pair of full-color maps, a dozen player handouts, and 8 hero cards, which are just pre-gen characters on a digest-sized handout. For a $30 price tag, this was a pretty beefy buy back in the mid-90s. The set is an update of the Grand Duchy of Karameikos, the book that started them all. The timeline is kicked forward 12 years, and the Duchy is now a kingdom after King Stefan decided to split from Handouts during their war with Alphatia. He promptly changes the name of the capital from Specularum to Miros to reflect the city's mirrored waters. In reality, the writers wanted the city not to sound like a medical device used in gynecological exams. It's fairly in-depth, giving the background, motivations, and goals of a huge number of NPCs in the setting. It's not light on the content. You've got a few changes from the original. King Stefan is now a grandfather, with his daughter getting married and having a couple of kids. Baron von Hendricks has been chased out and replaced with an incompetent noble, who isn't a bad guy, but incompetency is a poor substitute for menace and adventures. There's a few new baronies, and they don't offer much in the way of excitement. The ruins of Krakatoas have been rebuilt into a new magical academy, so that does provide for some new adventures. The biggest issue in the block is the tension is gone. There's no evil bad guy threatening the entire kingdom because von Hendricks and Barvel have been chased into other kingdoms. You've still got Magda Marilenev stewing in her own juices, hating the king after 40 years, but she's toothless. She's no threat. There's no obvious villain, and despite being more than a decade later, that's really not much of a change. Very few characters have died off. All the ambassadors are still there. Even the characters that were supposed to die off in the old gazetteer, or the modules linked to it, like Anton Radu or Oliver Jowett, are still alive. TSR played it safe by keeping much of the setting the same as the previous version, but they played it too safe by eliminating much of the tension. Like how the Cold War between the two empires, Handouts and Alphatia, defined Mystara as a whole during the gazetteers, suddenly Alphatia's gone and Handouts is bankrupt. Karameikos went from a struggling minor nation to a well-off country without much internal strife, surrounded by allies, and competently run. The kingdom, I dare say, is on the cusp of a golden age because everything's going well for it right now. The box set comes with an adventure book containing 2 different adventures. They're both short, as well as you can expect, and they both require the audio CD to play as the information is given through the CD. The first adventure is Trouble and Threshold, which plays like a choose-your-own-adventure module. It has numbered sections, and depending on which way the party goes, you play the appropriate track. It does bring back the Iron Ring, which were always great villains, so it's nice to see them back in action. It's extremely short, however. It is an introductory adventure, so you don't want to go too far into it. After that one, you've got The Sound of Madness, which reintroduces Alina the Cleric, all back from the dead and all grown up. Again, you're going to need your CD player because all the dialogue is spoken in the audio tracks. It's an interesting adventure. It's a bit of a light railroad as you have to find a missing druid and deal with a polymorph happy hag. There's a lot of silly voices that make it hard to take it seriously, and that's probably one aspect that hasn't aged well at all. I do have to talk about the CD. TSR was looking for a gimmick back in the mid-90s and thought audio CDs with voice actors and sound effects were the solution. Now it's almost 25 years later, and it's comical. Not many people have CD players anymore. Everything's gone digital. If you want to access the audio tracks, you have to get them on YouTube now. Listening to them, they sound like a He-Man radio play. Half the cast sounds gruff, the other half is English, and none of them sound like they come from a nation based heavily on Slavic Europe. The cleric casting spells sounds like he's calling the power of Grayskull. Well, that's track 3 on Kingdom of Karameikos if you want to go to the YouTube channel and listen. It was meant to be cutting edge, but it's hard not to think this is a discarded voice track from an 80s Saturday morning cartoon. I'm half expecting Eric and Sheila and Lisa and Presto to make a cameo. The dozen handouts are tied to the adventure book, with the exception of Bargel's wanted poster and the hiring notice for the Gnomish caravan. There's a lot of maps and some art showing where you are arriving to. They're nicely done. It's got a vellum look, and their use outside the adventure isn't that much. You would think they have given more useful forms, like from the players of the DM kits, but instead it's just standard adventure handouts. The quality of the book is the best in the series. It's full color, there's art on almost every other page. It fleshes out Miros and Threshold in detail. It does give a brief overview of all the future box sets that were planned, but sadly only Glantry ever saw print. The art style flips between real-world inspired from the Eastern European artists of lore to typical fantasy art with a bit of older art from the original set thrown on occasion. It does give you a lot of information on all the NPCs, and there are a ton of them. Remember, they haven't gotten rid of many of the old NPCs, and they've added a few more. It does go a bit more into depth for each of the NPCs than the original version did. The map is hand-drawn rather than hex grids, and that was a major break from the tradition of the gazetteer maps. The set doesn't change Karameikos much. The biggest alteration is the Black Eagle Baron has been run off, so there's no looming threat. You're calling Stefan king now, but he's still the head honcho, ruling fairly, if a bit naively. In all honesty, it's more than a bit boring. Stefan has been on the throne for 40 years now. His people accept him, if not adore him, for his fair and even rule. Even the two different ethnicities outside of his kingdom have begun to accept each other, and a third ethnicity has emerged from that's become the children of Thaetian and Traladaran parents. The module mentions the kingdom has taken in a large number of refugees from Alfheim, but doesn't go into much detail about them. There's a few new lords and ladies that have become landed nobility, but nobody stands out that I can think of. There is a new magic university, and I'll admit that was long overdue, but in the 40 years of Stephen Karameikos, he's had one rebellion and no real outside threat. Granted, he was under the protection of Thyatis, but Thyatis is bankrupt now, and they can no longer protect him, and even then he rejected them during their war with Alphatia, so he has no protection outside of his own troops, but he's bordered by Darrakan and the Five Shires, so there's no threat at all there. And even if Thyatis wanted to do something from what they consider a breakaway province, they've been ravaged by war, they're broke, there's nothing they can do. The only real threat is the humanoids that live inside the boundaries of Karameikos still, but they've been pushed back, according to the timeline, bit by bit as they're being shoved out as civilization progresses. That's great for the Karameikans, but as far as adventures, you gotta go look for trouble. You can still fit the old modules in there because a lot of Karameikos is still largely unexplored, so if you want to do Knight's Dark Terror or Rahazio or Palace of the Silver Princess, you can still put them in there. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just saying, as an overall nation, it's doing really well for itself, and because of that, there's not a lot of exterior threats that are posed to it. If you want to buy the box set, be patient. Online, people want about $80 to $100 to sell this. If you're willing to wait, you can get it for about half that in auctions. I waited and got mine for about $40. It's a nice supplement, but the demand for the gazetteer version is much higher. And the box set it's a nice addition to it, but everybody wants the original gazetteer. A lot of people have seen the CD and think it's a computer game, which it's not, obviously. Just double check the back of the box when you get it to make sure the contents are all in there, because there's a lot in the box set. That's the Kingdom of Karameikos. It's pretty. It does go to more than a bit of detail than the Gazetteer does in the background of the characters. It doesn't advance the plot much. Most of the bad guys from the Gazetteer are gone or toothless. It's a treasure trove of backgrounds, possibly more than the original book, but it's also a different edition than the rest of the setting, something that kind of doomed it to obscurity. The jump from Beckme to second edition didn't go over well with a lot of the people, and Mystara sadly died about a year or two after this was put out. It's not a bad read. It's got some nice art. It's got a lot of art. But if you've already got the Gazetteer, it doesn't really tell you much that you don't already know. So next week I'm going to start trying to finish off the modules from the Master set. There's not a lot of books left for the original setting, even if I do include the Blackmoor Quadrilogy, which I intend to. There's not a lot of Mystara-specific accessories. I will be trying to throw in the DM and the player's kits, because those are awesome, but it's a bunch of loose pieces of paper with some cards for a magic item or some back that's going to be hard to talk about. Still got all 4 of the almanacs. There's a little bit of the Hollow World supplements that were left. I mean, they only did 3 with some adventures. There's the Immortal modules, and then there's the Glantry box set and all the second edition modules, which there were never many. Then I'm going to have to go to the Vaults of Pandios to start digging for fan-base works. Maybe talk about Threshold Magazine. Of course, if they let us convert to 5th edition and the DM's Guild, then we could have all sorts of new stuff that would make them a lot of money and give players a new look into a classic setting. So until next time, remember to go to the D&D poll that I will include the link below, and tell them your favorite setting is Mystara, and you get your source material from the Vaults of Pandios, and of course, welcome to Mystara.